Alright, so in this tutorial we're going to be animating the weapon on the player, and then next tutorial we will be adding shooting finally. So let's go into our world scene, and here we have our player object. I'm going to go out of 2D view and pressing F to center on him. Let's start by going to our camera holder, and I am going to make in here a new empty game object called weapon holder. And in there I'm going to go into our models folder, the Glock we modeled last time. I'm going to put that as a child of the weapon holder. Oh my gosh, this is big. So I'm going to scale this down to about 0.1, which looks okay. And I'm going to make another child of weapon holder called block container, and I'm going to make a child of this called block pivot, and that's just going to help us with animating and organizing, and when we eventually have multiple weapons we'll have multiple containers and the containers will control each individual gun. So I'm going to take the Glock pivot and I'm going to make sure that it is centered on the Glock's handle. So I'm going to take the Glock, I'm going to move it, and check the pivot, and I'm going to move it, check the pivot, and make sure it's on the handle about there. And that's just going to make sure if we rotate the Glock by the pivot, then it will rotate by the handle instead of by the center of the Glock. So I'm going to come out of isometric mode, and I'm going to take the pivot and rotate it a bit so that it's pointing forward. I'm going to move it to the left and down. And while we're at it, I'm going to take our camera and set the field of view to about 80. And I'm going to set the near clipping planes to 0.1, which means that our Glock won't clip through the camera when it's close. So for example, if I had this at 0.5, you can see that the Glock clips into the camera. So if we put 0.1, then the Glock no longer clips into the camera. And be aware that if you put this too low, you'll start getting flickering shadows, which is kind of strange, but that's just a side effect of having too small a clipping plane. Let's find a good position for our Glock. I think here might be a good spot. Alright, so let's get started animating. On our player, I'm going to add an animator component, and we're going to make a new folder called animations. Not a new material, I don't know what I'm doing. Right click, create folder, animation. And we're going to store all our animation related things in here. So I'm going to right click, create animator controller, and we're going to name this player controller. I'm going to drag this into the animator slot, the controller slot on our animator. And up here I'm going to click this button, add tab, animation, and it's going to allow us to animate. And then we also have to go window, animation, animator, and that's going to add the animator tab. And this will be where we edit all the animation states, but that's not super important right now. So now we have the animation tab down here. I'm going to actually bring my game view over here just so we can see kind of what it looks like while we're animating. I'm going to put this a little bit on my second screen. Okay, we'll just, you know what, we're going to put it there. Down here maybe. There. Okay, so now we have a mini window of what our game will look like. It's just going to help us a bit for animating. So on our Glock right now, I actually don't really like this pivot. I'm going to move it in a bit so that it looks more like he's actually holding the Glock. Like so, and I'm also, I think, going to scale this down a little bit more because it's still huge. And now that we've scaled it down, the pivot's going to be off apparently, so let's adjust that again. I'm going to change it up a bit here, up a bit more, forward a bit. just so that you can see it in the camera in the bottom right. Alright, I think that's good. So we're going to start our animation by clicking here on the create button, and we're going to go into our animation folder, and we're going to name this block idle. And this will be just the idle animation for our block, so what it looks like when you're not using anything, when you're not shooting, when you're not running, when you're not walking. This will just be for when you're standing still, and we're going to have it bob up and down as if the character is breathing. So we're going to hit this record button here, and then I'm going to add property, camera holder, weapon holder, Glock container, Glock pivot, transform, position. And you can also do that by just editing the position here, and that'll add a keyframe. So now we have this 0 to 1 second animation, and I'm going to move the cursor to half a second, which is 0:30. And I'm going to set the, I'm going to move the Glock pivot up slightly. And if we play this animation, you can see that the Glock is slowly moving up and down. And I'm going to actually pause this, and I'm going to drag these out a bit so that our animation is 2 seconds long, not 1, just so we get a slower breathing here. And that is the idle animation finished. I'm going to make a new clip, and we're going to call this Glock walk. And I'm going to once again add the position. One thing I like to do to add position is if you click on this field and press Control X, Control V, it'll cut the X position and paste it, and that'll add a keyframe. And so now we can copy this keyframe with Control C and paste it at 2 seconds. So now at 1 second, we're going to take the pivot and we're going to move it to the left on the X-axis. At 30 seconds, we're going to change the Y position down, not 30 seconds, half a second, down a bit, and we're going to copy this Y position and paste it at 1:30. And now we should have a nice little walk animation for our gun, as you can see down there. And now we're going to make a run animation. I'm going to create a new clip, block, run, and for this, I think I'm going to want our Glock to be up a bit. Well, first of all, let's take the Glock pivot, and we're going to cut and paste the rotation just so that it adds a keyframe. And here I'm going to rotate it up a bit, and I'm going to move it forward. Now I'm going to come to 1 second here. There's going to be a faster animation, and I'm going to move it to the left, like so. And then coming here to the half-second interval. Actually, we're going to put, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put this at half a second, this at 1 second. So that's like this, and then at 15, we're going to drag it down a bit, copy, we're going to want to copy this Y value, paste it at 45. And now I'm going to add a little bit of rotation in here too. I think we're going to want, maybe at the 15 we'll have it dip down a bit. So I'm going to make sure at the 30 that the rotation has a keyframe. At the 15 I'm going to dip it down just a bit. Copy that rotation and paste it at 45. The rotation seems a bit much, so I'm going to turn it down a bit. Alright, that looks pretty good for our run animation. Now we are going to make an aimed animation. Aim. And for this, we are going to set the Glock pivot position to 0 on the X, so it's in the center of our camera, and we're going to raise it up. For this, I'm going to want the game view here. Actually, no, I'm not. I don't know where to put this, man. We're going to put it back down here. And we're going to just have the Glock pivot aim right in the center of our screen. And we might have to adjust this later if it's not in the exact center, because you want to shoot where you're aiming, right? And in this animation, I'm also going to take the camera and I'm going to set the FOV to 60. And now in our Glock idle, I'm going to set the camera FOV to 80. The Glock run, I'm going to set it to 80. And the Glock walk, I'm going to set it to 80. So now when we're aimed, we zoom in. And when we're walking or idle, we're zoomed out. So now we're going to make a Glock shoot animation. And for this, we're going to make this an additive animation in the animation editor. So for here, we're just going to not move the Glock's position on the X at all, because this animation will add to other animations. So we're going to record, and I'm going to make an animation here. We're going to have the pivot. Let's go back to shoot. I'm going to want the pivot to have a position keyframe, and I'm going to want it to have a rotation keyframe. And at 05 here, I'm going to have it kick back, rotate up, and then our Glock slide here. This Glock actually has an animator component on it because of Blender automatically putting it there. So we're going to go into Models, Glock, Rig, Animation Type, None, because we don't want the Glock to animate itself. We're animating it from the player. We're already handling that. And right now, Unity is automatically adding an animator component to the Glock, so now that's gone because we changed it in the rig. There's no rig on this Glock. So we're going to go to Glock Shoot again. And here I'm going to record and add a slide position keyframe. Then at 05 I'm going to set it to 1 so that it kicks back. And I'm going to actually set that to 2 maybe, so it kicks back a bit more. And also I'm going to have the trigger keyframe here, and we're going to have it 02 maybe, it's going to be rotated back. And our pivot for the trigger is not right. We want our pivot to be at the top of the trigger, so that when we rotate the trigger, it will rotate relative to where it should rotate, which is not the case. So I'm going to quickly open up our Glock model and come to our trigger here. And see, the pivot is right here, so if we were to rotate the trigger, it rotates like this, and we do not want that. So I'm going to press N to open up this tab, and I'm going to raise the 3D cursor on the Z axis, and then change it a bit on the X axis, so it's about there. And I'm going to press Shift Control Alt C and say origin to 3D cursor. And now we're going to save this and close back out of Blender. And this may mess up the trigger position, but it doesn't. That's good. So now if we rotate our trigger, you can see that it rotates relative to the trigger axle and not the center of mass. So we're going to add a keyframe here of it rotated back a bit, because we just pressed the trigger. Then here we'll have it go back to its normal self. So I'm going to copy the trigger rotation from here and paste it in here. So we just press the trigger and it's shot. Maybe we'll have that a little later. And then also here we're going to have the slide go back to 0. And we're going, actually let's just copy all of the keyframes from the start and paste them here. So now we have a nice little shooting animation, which will play whenever we shoot our gun. So I'm going to go in our animation folder real quick, and I'm going to make sure that the shoot animation does not loop, because we don't want the shoot animation to loop. If we were to want holding down to shoot, we would do that manually and without looping, because if we click the mouse button, we don't want it to accidentally shoot the gun twice. And so now we have all our animations, and really quickly I'm going to go into the animator window, and here's our base layer. This is all the animations that we just created right here. I'm going to delete the shoot animation from here, make a new layer. We're going to call this Glock Shoot. And in here, I am going to drag in the Glock Shoot animation. Actually, before we do that, we're going to create an empty state. I'm going to call this idle. And then we're going to drag the Glock Shoot in and make a transition from the idle to the Glock Shoot by right-clicking and clicking Make Transition. You know what, actually, we'll make a transition from any state. And we will set the transition duration to 0.01 because we want it to shoot almost instantly. And after we shoot from any state, we are going to have it move to idle. We're going to set the exit time to 1, transition duration to 0, because idle doesn't actually have an animation assigned, it's just where it'll go after it shoots so that it doesn't shoot again. And in parameters, I'm going to add a trigger here called Glock Shoot. And in the any state transition, I'm going to set the condition to Glock Shoot. I'm also going to move the game window back here because we are done animating for now. And so this means when the Glock Shoot trigger is called, it will shoot the gun. And also in our layers, this is super important, make sure that Glock Shoot, the blending is set to additive, and the weight is set to 1. And additive will mean, so we made this Glock Shoot animation, right? We made it at the hip, but we want you to also be able to shoot your gun while you're aiming. And we don't want to have to make 2 animations, one for hip and one for aiming. So what we've gone and done is we've made a generic animation for shooting, which we can add to any other animation. So if we're aiming and we play this animation, it'll just add all these values to the aiming animation so that we don't have to make a second animation. And so that is going to be it for this tutorial. Next episode we are going to, at the start of this episode I said next episode we were going to do shooting, but I think next episode we will instead finish this animator and make all these states called at the right time when our player runs and walks based on input. So I will see you guys next time.